The scent of damp pine needles and decaying oak always felt like safety to Donovan Vance. But tonight, the wilderness possessed a dense, claustrophobic weight. Nestled deep within the Upper Peninsula's vast black forest, their campsite sat miles beyond the reach of cell towers or paved roads. Rumors had circulated for decades in the surrounding logging towns about people vanishing into these woods without a trace, leaving behind only crushed tents and severed gear. Locals blamed rogue black bears or severe hypothermia, but Donovan had read enough old regional logs to know those explanations were polite lies. Around the dying campfire, his two closest friends, Marcus and Chloe, were laughing softly, their voices muffled by the sheer vastness of the dark trees. Donovan adjusted his jacket against the sudden, unnatural chill that had settled over the clearing, his eyes scanning the impenetrable tree line. "We should probably douse the embers and head into the tents," Donovan said, his voice quiet, almost instinctive. Marcus rolled his eyes, tossing another small branch onto the glowing red coals. "Relax, Donnie. We've been planning this weekend for 6 months," Marcus replied, leaning back in his camp chair. "There's nothing out here except us, some owls, and a few hundred square miles of trees." Chloe shivered, pulling her fleece tighter around her shoulders as she looked toward the thick timber. "I don't know, Marcus. The crickets stopped chirping about 20 minutes ago." That was when the first sound hit them. Not a snap of a twig, but a deep, resonant exhalation that seemed to vibrate directly through the soil. It wasn't the ragged grunt of a bear or the high-pitched yip of a coyote. It was deliberately quiet, controlled, and distinctly canine, coming from high above the forest floor. Donovan shone his high-lumen tactical flashlight toward the upper branches of an ancient cedar 50 yards out. The beam sliced through the mist, illuminating a silhouette that made Donovan's throat seize. Standing erect on two massive, digitigrade hind legs was a creature that easily surpassed 7 feet in height. Its frame was wrapped in dense, coarse charcoal fur, with shoulders so broad they rivaled a silverback gorilla's, tapering down to an unnaturally lean waist. But its head was undeniably that of a massive timber wolf, muzzle long and powerful, with amber eyes that caught the light and reflected it back with cold, calculating intelligence. It didn't roar, jump, or charge foolishly like a wild beast. It simply stared back at them, tilting its head slightly, as if assessing their strength. What is that?" Chloe whispered, her voice cracking as she stumbled backward against a supply cooler. Marcus stood frozen, his mouth open, all previous arrogance draining from his face in an instant. The creature slowly raised one thick upper arm, exposing long, curved black talons, and placed a single heavy paw against the trunk of the cedar. Then, with deliberate, patient precision, it stepped backward into the shadows, disappearing completely without making a sound. Donovan knew the lore well enough to feel the cold knot of absolute dread tighten in his stomach. This was no mindless monster. This was the apex predator of local legend, the Dogman. And worse, standard lore always warned of one crucial detail: they rarely hunt alone. The silence that followed the creature's disappearance felt heavier than any noise thick with the terrifying realization that they were being watched. "We need to get to the truck right now," Donovan said, his voice dropping an octave as he grabbed Chloe by the arm to steady her trembling frame. Marcus was already backing toward the tents, his flashlight beam wildly erratic as his hands shook uncontrollably. "The keys are in my pack, inside the main dome tent," Marcus stammered, his eyes wide with unadulterated panic. Donovan kept his light fixed on the perimeter, sweeping the high branches and low brush where the entity had merged into blackness. "Don't run, Marcus," Donovan warned sharply, feeling the subtle shift in the air that signaled a predator gauging weakness. "If you bolt, you trigger its kill instinct, and these things are built for the pursuit." Suddenly, a low, guttural chuff echoed from the north side of the camp, followed instantly by a responding click of teeth from the south. The realization hit Donovan like ice water poured down his spine. They weren't dealing with a solitary rogue hunter, but an organized pack working in unison. The intelligence of the Dogman lay not in the brute strength alone, but in its patient, methodical herding tactics designed to exhaust and corner prey. "They're circling us," Chloe gasped, her fingers digging into Donovan's coat as a massive shadow darted between two birch trees just 20 feet away. The movement was impossibly fluid, far too swift and heavy for anything native to these woods. Donovan reached into his belt holster, drawing his heavy caliber hunting revolver, though he knew conventional lead might only irritate a creature of that scale. "Marcus, get your pack. Now. Chloe, stay right behind me with your light on the left flank." As Marcus ducked into the nylon tent, a sickening snap tore through the air from the canopy directly above him. A massive figure dropped from a high pine branch with frightening grace, landing heavily on all fours before rearing up onto its hind legs. This one was larger than the first, its dark gray coat scarred across the chest, smelling strongly of wet copper and stagnant marsh water. It pinned the opening of the tent under its massive, five-toed paw, amber eyes glaring down at the trapped man inside with cold, deliberate satisfaction. Marcus let out a blood-curdling scream as the creature's head snapped forward, its powerful jaws clamping onto the canvas and tearing the structure to ribbons in a single motion. Donovan raised his weapon, lining up the front sight with the beast's broad chest, and pulled the trigger. The deafening roar of the firearm echoed through the valley, the muzzle flash momentarily blinding everyone in the clearing. The heavy round struck the creature in the shoulder, causing it to grunt and stumble back a step, but the wound only seemed to infuriate it. It turned its pointed ears toward Donovan, lips curling back to reveal rows of 3-inch yellowed fangs, dripping with saliva. From the surrounding dark, 3 more pairs of glowing amber eyes emerged from the brush, closing the circle around them with calculated, terrifying synchronization. "Run for the rocky ridge," Donovan bellowed, firing 2 more shots to force a brief gap in the eastern line. He grabbed Chloe's hand and pulled her into the dense brush, leaving the ruined camp behind, as the sounds of crashing timber and guttural roars filled the night air. Brambles and sharp pine needles tore at Donovan's face as they sprinted blind into the black forest, guided only by the bounce of their single remaining flashlight. Behind them, the sounds of heavy bipedal footfalls snapped thick branches with rhythmic, terrifying ease. The creatures weren't running at full speed, They were driving Donovan and Chloe upward toward the steep granite cliffs, pacing them like shepherd dogs driving livestock. Every few seconds, a low, chuffing call echoed from the left or right, a silent signal between the beasts to adjust their formation. Chloe stumbled over an exposed root, her ankle twisting with a sharp crack as she hit the damp earth with a stifled gasp. Donovan caught her before she could roll down the incline, hauling her over his shoulder as the heavy thrashing in the underbrush closed within 30 feet. I can't, Donovan. My leg, she wept, clutching his jacket as he pushed his legs to their absolute limit up the rocky slope. Ahead, the tree line gave way to an old, abandoned Forest Ranger lookout bunker built directly into the face of the granite ridge. The structure was ancient, a reinforced concrete shelter built in the 1950s with a heavy iron reinforced oak door and narrow, slit-like windows. Donovan lunged for the iron handle, his heart pounding in his ears like a sledgehammer as a shadow leapt from the brush onto the rocks behind them. He slammed his body against the door, feeling the rusted hinge groan before yielding, threw Chloe inside and threw his full weight against the heavy wood just as a massive force slammed against the exterior. The impact felt like a collision with a speeding vehicle, cracking the interior plaster and rattling Donovan's bones through the solid timber. Donovan threw the heavy iron slide bolt into place, just as sharp, black talons gouged 4-inch deep trenches through the outer wooden paneling. Outside, the forest felt deadly quiet, save for the heavy, wet breathing of multiple alpha predators standing just inches away on the other side of the door. Chloe curdled into a ball on the cold, concrete floor, sobbing quietly while holding her swollen ankle in the pitch darkness. Donovan backed away from the entrance, sweeping his flashlight beam around the dusty, long-forgotten supply bunker. Old steel shelving units lined the rear wall, filled with rusted tools, decaying canvas bags, and forgotten forestry equipment from a bygone era. Suddenly, a long, thick snout wedged itself through the iron-barred window slit above the workbench, its amber eye rolling toward Donovan with terrifying intelligence. The creature didn't attempt to force its massive head through the small opening. Instead, it began testing the structural integrity of the steel bars with its clawed hands. They're not just trying to break in, Donovan realized with horror as he noticed 2 more pairs of eyes watching through the narrow slit. They're testing the weaker points, waiting for us to panic or exhaust ourselves. Donovan turned frantically to the shelves, knowing the old iron door wouldn't survive an organized, repeated assault by 4 multi-hundred-pound beasts. His beam illuminated an old wooden crate labeled U.S. Forest Service, Highway Clearing, Distress Control. Prying the lid open with a rusted crowbar, Donovan's eyes locked onto 4 long, heavy cylinders wrapped in wax paper alongside a vintage signal flare launcher. They were high-intensity industrial highway road flares and old formulation road-clearing termite canisters, designed to burn at over 3,000 degrees to melt fallen iron girders or clear rock slides. More importantly, strapped next to them was a heavy metal canister of concentrated commercial bear-deterrent sulfur fog, an obsolete chemical agent banned decades ago for its sheer potency. Outside, the wooden door groaned loudly as 2 of the Dogmen threw their combined weight against the central panel, splintering the oak frame. Donovan grinned grimly through the sweat and dirt on his face, grabbing the thermite flares and heavy metal valve as a plan began to take shape. The timber door gave a sickening crack as the main support beam fractured under the creature's relentless coordinated battering. Donovan worked with cold, deliberate speed, knowing they had less than 2 minutes before the barricade completely buckled. He jammed 2 thermite canisters into the center of a heavy metal supply bucket, surrounding them with broken road flares and the punctured valve of the old sulfur fog canister. "Chloe, cover your face with your jacket and don't breathe in this air," Donovan ordered, dragging her behind a concrete pillar at the rear of the bunker. Outside, a low, triumphant chuff sounded as the lead dogman thrust its massive charcoal-furred shoulder through the splintered gap in the doorframe. Its broad, wolfish head followed, amber eyes locking onto Donovan with cold, predatory triumph as its jaw unhinged to reveal sharp yellow fangs. Donovan struck a signal flare against the wall, ignited the thermite fuse, and kicked the loaded metal bucket directly beneath the broken door. "Back!" he screamed, dropping behind the concrete column just as the chemical reaction caught. A blinding flash of white, hot light erupted inside the small entryway as the thermite reached 3,000 degrees in a fraction of a second. The intense heat instantly ignited the sulfur fog agent, creating an overwhelming, thick cloud of acrid, searing chemical gas that billowed directly into the lead creature's face. Dogmen possess sensitive, olfactory senses that dwarf those of standard wolves, making the blinding heat and caustic chemical smoke infinitely more agonizing for them. The lead beast let out an agonizing, high-pitched scream, a sound that was horribly human as it recoiled violently from the door, thrashing wildly in the narrow corridor. The sheer thermal force of the reaction shattered the remaining wood and melted the rusted hinges, blowing the doorway wide open into the night air. Donovan stepped around the pillar, shielding his eyes from the blinding glare, and saw the pack in complete, disoriented chaos outside on the ridge. The creatures were clawing frantically at their own faces and muzzles, overwhelmed by the blinding chemical light and the choking smoke that scorched their lungs. The disciplined, patient coordination of the pack broke entirely as the beasts scrambled backward down the rocky slope, howling in agony. Donovan didn't hesitate. He hoisted Chloe over his shoulder once more, grabbed the burning road flare as a visual shield, and charged out into the mountain air. The blinding white light of the road flare kept the disoriented beasts at bay, their shadows retreating deeper into the thick pines as they nursed their burns. Donovan pushed through the timber for 2 grueling miles, following the natural downward gradient of the mountain toward the access highway. The distant roars of the pack grew fainter with every yard, replaced eventually by the hum of asphalt and distant vehicle headlights. He collapsed near the edge of State Route 28, flagging down an oncoming logging truck with the dying embers of his road flare. The driver pulled over, shocked at the sight of the bloodied, soot-covered man carrying an injured woman out of the pitch-black woods. As the truck sped away toward the nearest hospital, Donovan looked back through the rear window into the tree line one last time. Standing high on a ledge overlooking the highway, framed against the moonlight, was the tall, shadowed silhouette of a single dogman. It was not pursuing them, it simply watched the truck recede, its golden eyes gleaming with patient, silent intelligence. knowing the woods would always belong to them.